Good afternoon, everyone. So this session, we'll be going through a bit on Power BI. So what I would try to do within this 1 hour is to provide a background of how Power BI operates, and then from there we would start building our data, our visuals.
You may notice a slight difference in the layout of your Power BI application and what you're seeing on screen. To change that, all you need to do is go to File, click on Options and Settings, then select Options and then Preview Features. Tick off the On Object Interaction on your Power BI application, and then OK. It will require you to restart your system, and then once you do that, it would update to the version, to the layout you're seeing on the screen.
Now, in terms of the Power BI application, one of the first places you would start with would be this place where is get data. Now, the get data tool serves as a means for you to pull in the data from different sources. So you could do from an Excel workbook, from a Power BI semantic model, which is one of the things that they've added recently. If you are connecting to an SQL server database, you can also use that. Or if you have a website where you are pulling data from, you could equally do that. For those who are familiar with Python, you could use a Python script to pull data into Power BI. In using the Get Data application, what you would usually do is what we refer to as the extract, transform, and then load data into Power BI. What you would do for those who have worked with with Excel, what you would notice is if you use the Get Data tool and you then load data into Power BI, it opens what we refer to as the as Power Query. Now, Power Query is an interface that you can use to clean your data and use it for what once you have done with your data cleansing, you can then take it into the next stage, which is the data modeling part of the application. So, what I would do now is I would start pulling in the data from some of the sheets that we're going to be working with. And once I've pulled in those reports, then we can start looking at how we go about the data modeling part of it. The other parts, so after the get data part, you have the insert part of it where you might look at inserting your charts or your visuals into Power BI. Now, on the left here, which is a critical part that you see, there are three parts of it. You have the review, the report part, which is where most times we do our interaction, where you are preparing the report you are working with. You then have the table view. The table view shows you what the data you have pulled into the application looks like. And then the last part is the model view. Now, this is when you bring in your table and then you want to create relationships within those tables. And that's where knowledge about how tables relate, where you are dealing with a one-to-one, a many-to-one, or a many-to-many relationship. Those are the kind of things that you're looking at. But as I mentioned, we'll just go ahead and start pulling the data. And as we build on it, we will then go through the different parts, which is looking at the table, building our data model in this application. I'm going to be working on the HR data set. I'll be pulling in three tables, which is the education, employee, and then the performance rating tables into Power BI. And I'll take them one by one. So that's the employee. So let's pull in the employee data first of all. And once that data is pulled in, what it will open up is Power BI first connects to that table. When it connects to that table, the next thing it will then do is to give you the option to say, do you want to transform the data or do you want to load the data? So this is where you have the loading the data, or do you want to transform the data? Now, that's the process that is referred to as the ETL: extract, transform, and load. Now, you could decide to load the data directly into the Power BI environment. But most times it's advised that you first of all go to the transform option to look at what that data would be like in terms of the data type. So I would select transform data to then open. So once I select transform data, it opens the Power BI, the Power Query interface. Now, the Power Query interface, what that does is it helps me see what the different columns in my table will look like. So in the different columns, what you would then see would be at the top here. For if you are familiar with Power Query, you will see here it tells you the data type. So if I click on this item here, this option here, what is showing me are the different data types. Is it a decimal type? Is it a whole number, or is it a date column type of data? And you select whichever one. Now, the beauty around it is that the Power Query interface has automatically identified the type of data type for each of the fields. So the question would be, okay, is this correct? Which is why you are inspecting the data. Once you've done that, you've looked at that to inspect and say, okay, is this correct? Then that's fine. Now, in this Power Query interface, you have different options here where you can look at the transform data. If you depends on what you are doing in the data set. If you want to make any changes like replacing values, you want to unpivot your table, like change the shape of the tables that you have in your table, or maybe you want to use the extract option to work on some text within that data set, and we'll come to do that. You also have the option to add a column where you could add a custom column, or you could add a conditional column, which is based on an option. Now, the other side of it is on the right here, you'll see the query settings. Now, what the query settings does is that anytime you apply a step in working on your data, it's recorded here. So you could change the name of your query or leave it that way. But let's assume this query settings is not here and it's closed here. If I close it, all you would simply need to do is to go to the view option. Okay, sorry, it's closing. If you go to the view options at the top here, you can then select the view option, and it would, you'll see at the at the left corner there, you'll see query settings, and you can select it to be able to see what's happening in what are the steps that you've done through. Now, the beauty around that is anytime you have a series of steps that you've applied on a data set using the Power Query editor, it records those steps. So if you bring in a new set of data or add additional data to your table, what it will do is it will record those steps that you've previously applied, will automatically be applied to your data sets all over again on your Power Query using the Power Query editor for the steps that are already recorded in your data set. You can see now the query editor has gone off. So if I click back here and click on query settings, it brings it back. Now, like what I mentioned around the type of data set. So let's say I want to do something on one of these tables here. So for example, this job roles, if I were to split the job roles using the transform option here, so if I split this column and decide on a delimiter, so a delimiter is any character you use to identify within a text that you are using to identify something within a text or a string. So if I take that delimiter, click on delimiter, for example, and say I want to use a space, and I click OK, what it will do is it will split that column into it will split that column based on the criteria, which is the space. So every word after a space is then split into a new column within the Power Query editor. Now, if I cancel, and then you will notice that it records the steps at the side here. So if I cancel this now, let me take that out. What it does automatically, it returns my column back to the way that it was originally. And the other part is, let's say you want to choose. So instead of, if I want to hide certain columns, maybe after I finish working on them, and I want to hide certain columns in my data set, all I will just do is come here, click on this option, which is choose columns, and then select the columns that I don't want to load into the environment eventually. So if I uncheck all of these columns here, maybe just this few here, and I click OK, you'd see that those columns have been removed, and then it's recorded within the Power Query editor to say removed other columns. So I will undo that just to cancel it, and it takes it out. Okay, so I will load the other two tables, which are the performance rating tables. So those are CSV files. I'll just load them. So that's the we have the employee table first of all. So it's to education level. I'll bring that in. And then the last table I will bring in will be the performance table. So you would see it's also giving me the option here to load that, and I'll load it in, and then bring in the last table here, which is the performance rating table. All right. So if you can see here, the three tables have been loaded into Power BI. Now, these three tables, all I'm going to then do is to join the two of them, which is where we come into what we refer to as the modeling part of our table, because the modeling part of the work we do within Power BI is what helps you create relationships that you can then use when you are doing your data visualization within the Power BI environment. So for these three tables, first of all, we have the employee table, which we are going to then begin to build visuals to answer certain questions that would help the head of HR to make some decisions about the organization. And we have the education level table. And then finally, we have the performance rating table within the Power BI environment. Now, with all these tables, once I'm done with them, all I would simply need to do is click on close and apply. Once I close and apply, it will take these tables into it will now take it back into the reports view in Power BI. So I'll close and apply, and it takes us there back as it now begins to load it in that environment. Power BI on its own now begins to look through the tables and tries to identify if there is a relationship between those tables. Okay. And once it identifies those relationships, it then creates a connection between them, if there is any. All right. So in this instance now, it's not been able to identify any relationship between the tables, but what we would look at, as I mentioned, is we'll go to the table view here. The table view will show us what the different tables look like. So if I click on this, I can now see what the tables will look like here after I've loaded it into Power BI. Possibly I might have done some data cleansing in it. And I think the education level. Now, what I would look at here in trying to build my data model, because we want to form that relationship between them, is to say, okay, employee ID. So employee ID is in my employee table. And then if you go to the other table, which is the performance rating table, the performance rating table also has an employee ID. Now, with that, we can create a relationship between them. That relationship is what we refer to as a one-to-one, a one-to-many relationship. And when you are creating relationships or creating models in Power BI, there's what is referred to as the star schema. The star schema is the type of structure of the tables in Power BI, where you have what we refer to as a fact table and a dimension table. A fact table is a table that holds information that is frequently updated in your database. So, for example, the employee table is a fact table because this table will be updated frequently with information about employees that work in that organization. Now, if an employee leaves the organization, that table will be updated. If an employee joins the organization, that table will be updated. So the fact table is spelled FACT, which is fact. Then the dimension table. What the dimension table is a table that looks up information in another table. So the dimension table can be used like it's like a what is happening, so that's more like what you say. So if I say my employee table is my fact table, the performance rating table can be used to ask questions. Okay, what is happening in the employee table? That's what the fact table that's what the other table would then, that's what the dimension table would do. It looks up information in the fact table to help you ask what or why, questions that will relate to what is happening or why is it happening. That's the difference between the dimension table and then the fact table. And if you have your star schema, which is the structure of your data model that helps you define the relationship between tables in a database, what that star is you have your fact table in the center, and then you would have your dimension tables around your fact table. That's the way it will work. So your dimension tables will be around it, while your fact table usually is in the center. It's not for some persons. Some people might structure it differently. There are some persons that use another um, modeling structure that is called Waterfall, where you might have the fact table at the bottom and then all the dimension tables at the top. But most times in standard is people use the fact table in the center, then you have the dimension tables around the fact tables like a star shape. That's the way it is. And if you have other tables that relate to the dimension table, you will then have what is referred to as like a snowflake table. Okay. So let's come back here again. Now, as I mentioned, if you create a relationship between the two tables, so let's say I create a relationship between the employee table and the performance rating table. To do that, as I said, just click on your employee ID and then drag it to the employee ID table here, and it would identify each of the columns. So what it does is it will go to the employee table and identify, okay, employee ID is going to relate to employee ID in performance rating. Now, it's identified that this is a many-to-many relationship. Now, for it to be a many-to-many relationship, what that means is that the you don't have unique records in one of the tables, so which is my employee ID table. So possibly there would be duplicates in my employee ID table, which is why it is throwing it up as a many-to-many. When we say many-to-many, it's like saying you have three types, or as I mentioned, a one-to-many relationship where you have one teacher, for example, to many students. That's a one-to-many relationship. If you were to use a one-to-one, you could say one person has one unique passport ID. Then you have a many-to-many relationship, which is students can have many subjects that they take, and then you could have different courses assigned to different students. That would be like a many-to-many relationship. Now, because I've seen that there is a many-to-many relationship, it tells me that it's possible that there is an issue with my employee table, meaning that that table does not have unique records, because the employee table is supposed to have just unique record of each of the employees. And with that, I can go back to go and clean that database so that I remove any form of duplicates that I have in that table before I then come back to join the tables again. So I'll quickly just do that. What I'll do is I'll open okay, so I've created a relationship, but I'm going to have to delete it, because if you notice, what it's saying is that the relationship has a many to many. This should only be used if it is expected that neither column contains unique values. And we would expect that our employee table should have unique values and not have duplicates within them. So I would delete the relationship. So if I do that, right click to delete the relationship, right click on the relationship and then delete it, and it will take it out. And it will just prompt to say, do you want to delete this table relationship? Visuals using tables from the related table might be broken, and I'll delete it. Okay. So I will go back to my reports view, or not even go back to here. While I'm still within the model view, I will go to transform data. Then I will click on transform the data again, and it will open up the Power Query page. And once I come to the Power Query page, what I come here to look at is, okay, employee ID. It's possible that they are duplicates. So let me just sense check that. And so I click on this place here, this arrow here, and then click on ascending to see what's happening here. Why do I have a many to many? Are there duplicates of the employee ID inside here that is causing that issue to come up? Now, with that, let me I just want to try and spot if there is anyone. That's why I arranged it in ascending order. Okay, so it looks like these first three IDs appear to have duplicates. They look the same. Now, even though the employee names are different, the employee IDs appear to be the same in this scenario. So that's something you can call out. To quickly remove that, all I would do is right click on this header and then say remove duplicates, and I would remove duplicates, and that takes it out. Once I've removed the duplicates, I will come back here and then click on close and apply. And what it would do then is it will then go through everything again and load it. And this time I will try it again, and let's try and see if we can connect the relationship between the employee ID to the performance rating ID. Okay, now because I have removed that duplicate, it now has a one-to-many relationship between the two tables. And I can just save that, and it creates that relationship between the two tables. Okay, and then that's all for that one. Let me see if we have employee ID here on this other side. Okay, so let me just check this employee table here. So come here on the employee table, and I will just quickly look through to see if we have employee education level. Okay, so we have education field, we have education, and then let's see education level table. Okay, so the education level table has an education level ID, while the employee table has an education column. Now we can create a relationship between the two tables using this field as the point where we will then create a one-to-many relationship between the education level and the employee level tables. So what I would do is to create that relationship, I will just click on the hold the employee table here, employee level on the employee level table, and then drag it to the education. Where is that? So let me just check that again to be sure of which column I'm using. So this is education, and then this is education level ID. All right, so that's fine. So education level ID will go to education. Okay. And it creates a one-to-many relationship between the both of them. And I will save that now. All right. So what I have done here is what we'll refer to as data modeling. In the data model is very important because what it will do is when you then go into things like data analytics expression, it's helpful because that's where you then start writing the codes. The data analytics expression is like the language you use in Power BI when you want to write or give instructions for Power BI to do additional type of calculations on the tables in your data model. So if your data model is there's an issue with your data model, it will be difficult for Power BI to be able to use the DAX operation to make those connections between the different tables. Now, also to add, if you don't want to use this option of dragging and dropping, if you look at the side here, there's an option by this side where you can choose the table and the columns that you want to connect to each of the different options. So if I were to delete this connection here, let me say I delete this connection, for example, and then I want to create a relationship between the two. If I click here, so you see at the top here, you see manage relationships. If I click on manage relationships, it will then tell me new relationship, and I would then select. So it has detected one, which is performance rating to the employee ID, which is existing. And I would click new relationship. It will open this table, and then I will come to education level, click on this education level column here, and then I would go to the employee table and look for the education level here and click on that. So it now creates a one-to-many relationship. So that's an alternative that you can use instead of dragging and dropping. So if you don't want to drag and drop, so it's done that, and I just close it. If you don't want to drag and drop, you can use the manage relationship option at the top here. With the manage relationship option at the top, it will just give you the fields, and then you can connect those tables to where you want them to go to. And then we come to the reports view here. Now, before I go into the reports view, I'll just take a bit of time to discuss what we call calculated measures and quick measures, because that is helpful when you start writing data analytics expressions. That's DAX, data analysis expressions, DAX, which is the language in Power BI. You have what we refer to as a new measure or the measures, and then you have a calculated column. A when you The difference between a calculated in a measure and a calculated column is that a measure will only run at the report level. So this is the report here. So the measure will run at the report level. It's only when you add a visual, that's where the measure will operate. However, if it is a calculated column will always run on the tables. So if anytime I open my database, it will always show up in the database for the calculated column. Increases the size of my database anytime I use a calculated column. So for example, if you want to use a calculated column, let's say you just to illustrate, for the purpose of illustration, for a calculated column would be, let me use, so let me say I want to remove 1 year from each person's age in the age table. All I would do is if I click on this, the age, I then click on new column. This new column will then say, okay, what do I want to do in this new column? And that's where you now have the calculated column. It's similar to what you would do in Excel. If you understand Excel to some extent, it's just to say maybe if I type in new age and I'll say equals to, so what I would then be looking for is this particular column, and I say maybe age. So it will, when you then type age, what it does is it will give you the options of the columns in your table that you can select from. So if I say age, which is employee, and I say -10, for example, that's just an illustration. It will run it, and then you would see inside it that Power BI has then added, by the side, you will see that it has added a column. Now, this sign here is what will let you know that this is a calculated column, which is the it is plus, they call it a word in maths, it's like the alpha sign. So you have this sign here beside the table, and that tells that this is a calculated column in Power BI. And every time you run your data, maybe you open this database and you add new data to it, it will always run this column. What it will do is it also increases the size of your data in Power BI. So that's not something we want, and we would usually prefer to keep it at the calculated measure level, because for the calculated measure, it only runs at the report view. So it doesn't impact the efficiency of your reports that way if you use a calculated measure. However, there are scenarios where you might need to use a calculated column. Depends on what you're working on. So I'll just delete it since I'm not going to use it. That's been taken out. And then we come to the report view page. Now, the report view, on the report view here, you have the charts that you will be working with. Now, these charts, there are different types of charts here. So you have the stack bar charts, and on that one, you can then start playing around with it. Now, in this illustration, let's just take a rough view. Maybe I want to get the number of people in the organization. This is where we have what we refer to as a KPI card here. This is the KPI card here. So if I click on this, it will import it into the report. And then let me go to the, for example, employee ID, and I select the employee ID. So on the employee ID, it comes here, but you see what it's doing here is it's going to look at it to say the first employee ID. But instead, what we want is, it has only shown us the first person in our list. But what we want is a count to say, okay, how many employees do we have in this organization? So what you can do is, if you click on the arrow beside the field here, it will bring out this option here. And in this option, you can then select to say, okay, how do I want to summarize my data? Instead, do I want a count distinct or a count? Now, if you use a count distinct, what the count distinct will give you is the unique number of staff IDs, while a count would count everything in the table. So if I use a count, for example, let's say count distinct anyway. So it turns this to a number and tells me that you have 1,468 people within this organization. Now, one of the things I also just forgot to mention is anytime you look at your table, you would notice that there is this sign here, this numeric sign, and that's what we refer to as an implicit measure. Now, an implicit measure is that Power BI has identified that particular column and it says that, okay, with this particular column, it's possible you can use it to do a calculation because it looks like a numeric field, which is different from this one where this attrition, for example, where it doesn't have this sign here. Now, that's more like it could be any other type of field, which is mostly a text field. If you look at this other one here, it has a calendar beside it, which tells us that this is a date type of field in our table here. So when you see that, you know that there's a difference. So let's assume let me use this KPI card again, for example. I would include another one. I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I use this KPI card again, and then instead I insert age, for example, now you would see that what it has done is it has done a sum because Power BI identifies that this is a numeric field and you can use it to do a form of calculation on it. So in terms of the type of summarizations, you'll see that you have sum, average, minimum, maximum. So it tells you that this is more of a numeric field, and that's what we call is referred to as an implicit measure because that column has already been identified by Power BI as a column that can be used for some form of calculation. However, when you then want to do an explicit measure, is when you then start using what we refer to as DAX. Now, I would not, maybe when we go into next week, we can do a bit of that. But just to do a run through of this, I think there were some questions that I had shared earlier. And so maybe what we can do within the next, say, 10-15 minutes is to try to run through those questions and try and see if we can use that to build any visualization within the report interface. So I'll take a break here. Maybe if you have any questions or if there's anything you want to clarify before we then move into using the questions to start building our reports.
Hello.
Okay. Yeah, go
Hello.
ahead, please.
Hi,
Yeah.
Shogbemi. Thank you. I just wanted to, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, if you have the facts and the dimensions table, sometimes if you just have the facts table, you have to definitely build your dimensions table.
Okay.
How would you advise that you go about building that in terms of which of the informations can one separate into dimensions tables? And what would be the best approach? Maybe I think that's just a question. If you're just with a facts table, maybe at work, and then you need to build create relationships with different files. How would you say that? How would you advise an approach on that?
Okay. All right. I'll take that question. Let me just take the two questions then. So Abdulrahman.
Okay, mine is about the data that you use in the employee ID data. Will you send it to us so we can practice with it?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. I will send that across. So, all right. So let me take the question around the fact table. So let's assume this is this employee table now is our fact table, and we want to create dimensions. Now, the dimension table usually would tell us is like it's asking what the dimension table in simple terms, the way I usually look at it is what information do we want to analyze within our fact table. So if I were to do that, one of the ways that I would usually try to look at is what columns can we use to get additional information. So if you scan through this table, for example, gender, you can create a dimension on gender because what that gender column will tell us is what's the breakdown of the gender within our employee within the organization. You can also use business travel, for example, because you look at the business travel, it gives you a breakdown. Now, sorry, I forgot to mention, let me just, because of this, what's showing at the bottom here. Now, if you come to the top here, where you see view, when you click on view, what view does is it shows you it gives you an option to see what the quality of the data in each of the columns are, and then also the distribution. So if I were to click on the column distribution, for example, it would give me that distribution, say 3 of those items within this column are unique. And then in terms of the quality, so this is the quality, column quality, which tells you, is it valid? Are there any errors, or is there any empty item within your field? So let me check this off again. The same thing for department. So I could use the department. Now, if I were to use department, what I would do is I can right click on this table, then duplicate the table. If I click on duplicates, I've duplicated that table, and then I come to the department table. I click on the department table, then I can right click and remove other columns. So if I remove other columns here, I've done that, and then remove duplicates here. So I've created one dimension, and on this dimension, I can label this departments. Okay, I'll come back to my employee table. Let me look, which other field can I use to analyze my information? Maybe I could use job role, for example. If I were to use job role, I think job role will be fine. So if I were to use job role, let's use job role as an instance. So I have quite a lot here, or yep. So if I right click on this table, duplicate it, and then go to the where is that? Please go to this job role here, right click on it, remove other columns here, and then right click on it again, and then remove duplicates. So I have all these. So now with this, what I'm going to be saying is what information, or how do I want to break down my fact table? So I want to break it down based on the job role, or I want to break it down based on the department. So I'll title this job role, and okay. And I can close and load it into my report. Now, one of the reasons why you might want to do that, just to provide further context for the question that has been asked, is if I don't want, if I want to reduce the size of my table, so that instead of having a very large table, sometimes you just want to look for some of the things that are unique within that table. So you you reduce repetition of columns, which is what we refer to as data redundancy. Redundancy is that you have additional columns that you might not need to use for anything. So you can remove those columns and then keep the key columns that you want within your data structure. So that way it reduces the size of your data set and also improves the efficiency of your model event overall. Okay. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does, actually. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I can then close and apply. Now, when I close and apply, what it will then do is it will detect, try to create a relationship again, detect relationships. And then this time, if you would notice, it has created a relationship between the department and the employee table, within the job role and the employee table. And this is more like what we refer to as the star model, the star schema, where you have the fact table in the center and then you have the dimension. So education is one dimension, department is one dimension that you can look up information in the employee table, job role is another dimension, and then you have the performance rating as another dimension. Now that we have this, usually, which is where I think we can do this, we'll do it in two parts. I will build a rough sketch of the, what I call it, of the reports quickly. But the way I would always advise is when you're going to build any report, try it as much as possible to build a base structure of what your report is going to look like. Because sometimes what happens is we start building a report and we've not taken into consideration what that report would look like for the end user. So the first thing we want to do is create like an overview of what that or like a chart on what the employees would look like. Now at the right here, your view of Power BI of this point here might differ because here you have the data. So if you click on this tab here, it shows you the data that is in your reports. If you click on this next one here, this will give you the your chart types. If you click on this one, this is for formatting your reports, and then this is a performance layer. You might not necessarily need it, except if you think that your report is becoming too slow. Okay. And I can collapse it. For some persons, the view might be slightly different. All right, so I will just build a few visuals here quickly to just give us a rough idea. So let's start with the, if we go to the employee table, for example, and we want to see like a count. So we'll use like the card, as I mentioned. So this is a KPI card, and we want to see the count of the employee ID. So it's giving us this. And then if I change this to count, so count distinct. Now, I will do something similar, which is where if you want to start creating your DAX measure, data analysis expression. Now, what we would advise, or I would advise is when creating your DAX measures, have a separate, what I call it, table. Now, to create a separate table for it, all you simply need to do is come to enter. Enter is here. You click on enter, and then you can change the name of that table to say your KPI or whatever you want to use. Key KPI is what I'll call it. And then I will load it. Now, once I load it, what it will do is that it will create a table here. Now, this table, it looks like a regular table until I now start adding measures. So if I click on these three dots here, and when I click on the three dots beside it, it will bring this option and now say new measure. Now, once I click on new measure, it will open this, what I call the calculation field. And it says, what is the measure you want to write? So if I then change it and then say number of employees, so that's number of employees is equals to, there are different functions, but as I always, if you have some knowledge of Excel, some of the measures, some of the functions you see in Excel, you will also see it in DAX, because you can do DAX in, you can write data analysis expressions in Excel as well. So if I say count, let's see, so as I'm typing, you see it starts bringing it out. So if I say distinct, so it gives you distinct counts. So I just click on distinct count. Now, what it will then bring you, it will tell you distinct, and then gives you a guide to say the column name. What's the column name you want to find the distinct count of? So that's what it will do. And then all I simply do, maybe type employee ID. So this employee ID, it gives me the option. I click on employee ID and I close it. And that's that. And then you see you can see it gives you like a calculation sign. Now to change this so that it looks, so that you can now see that it's a, that's where my measures are. All I would do is delete this first place here. So if I come here and I delete this first column, because I'm not going to use it for anything. So you just delete from model. Okay, so it will ask, are you sure you want to delete column 1? And I say yes. All right, so automatically you can see that it's changed. It's no longer showing as a table. It's now showing as a calculation, like a calculator, which tells me that all my measures are going to be held in this place. There's a way, maybe as your measures increase, we can also look at how to organize them within it. And we'll then do that again. Let's create that measure again and say, this is the card. And this is our KPI here. And I click on it. And you see, it's the same thing that is giving us. But this time, if I want to do any additional calculations, because this is a calculated measure, I can use it to do additional calculations with DAX. Okay, so I'll take out this one. Let's take this one out. This is our employee ID. And then we'll create a few other small tables here before we round off today and pick it up next week. So let's say let's use a clustered bar chart, for example. So in this illustration, we want to see like a breakdown of the employees within the organization. So if I come here and I say, I think there's a field for department here. Where is department? Okay, so this is department here. I click on department. Automatically, it will assign it to the y-axis, because what happens is the y-axis would usually hold non-numeric variables if it's not a number, while the x-axis will hold numeric variables. And then if I select the employee to this measure I've put in now, and I take that, so you can see it's giving me the number of employees based on the department type here. If you want to do a format of that, if you click on this option, that's the format here, you can see to the left here. If I click on format, it would then bring up the options here. And then based on what I want to do, for example, if I want to do some additional formatting of that field, so you can see here, the data label is not highlighted. So if I click on, which is the data label, it then assigns the values to that, to those columns. If I then expand it further, I can see the values here. I click on the values and I would come down here to say, okay, how do I want it to show up? It's showing up as units, but it's not. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So what I want to do is here, the position. Yeah. So in terms of position, do I want it inside and outside end? So usually my preference would be outside end. So you see, it has highlighted it out. And if you come to it again and you click on the y-axis, so that what you are doing is, you can see on the y-axis, it has the name of the department, but I may not want the name there. So I just uncheck the title from there. And I'll do the same thing for the x-axis. So click on x-axis, uncheck the values here, and also uncheck the title from it. So that way it gives it a better look for my report. Then maybe the other one I might want to do is, I want to look at the terms of ethnicity. So maybe ethnicity might be another thing I'm looking at. And then I would use a stacked. Let me just use this one here. Okay, so if I take this as the illustration here, let's use, I think, education. I put education here on this side, and then let's use the count. Okay, so let's use the count of employees as well again, because of the type of chart. So you can see what it has done here is, it's okay. No, not the employee. This is education. Let me see. Should be education field. Okay, yeah. All right. So what it has done, you can see that in terms of the numbers, the in this type of bar chart now, it assigned it the name of the field on the x-axis and then the numeric variable on the y-axis, because I've used a stacked bar chart instead of this other one, which is the clustered bar chart. And the same thing I can just simply do is come back here again on the data label, activate the data label here, and it will highlight, put the numbers here. And what I would do is remove the labeling by the side, which is come to the x-axis, so the y-axis, remove the title from the y-axis, also remove the numbers because you might not need that. And then at the same time, remove the title on the x-axis. Then if I want to sort it in terms of the hierarchy, at the top here, you will see the 3 dots here. If you click on these 3 dots, and then it will tell you sort axis. So how do you want to sort it? By the number of employees and then by the ascending. So you take it from the smallest to the highest. So it will sort it that way, from the smallest one to the highest one. If I then want to do something else, which is, like you can see, there's a title for this bar chart. If I want to change the title, I can come in here to change the title of the bar chart. So instead, I can say distribution of employees by department. Okay. And it would highlight that, arrange it properly so that it's well aligned. And we have that one there. So what you would basically just do is, for each of the different type of For each of the different type of charts you are building, depends on what you are looking at here. You can then start building each of them and then arrange it within your Power BI layouts. But that's where what happens is, if you have a layout for your visual before you start, it helps a lot. So what we'll do for next week is two things we would want to do is work on the data analysis expression. But before we do that, we will start by building out what a visual would look like for the reports, so that once you build out the visual for the report, you can then use it to have an idea of how you are going to lay out that report on this pane eventually, and give you a view of what the end user is going to have when they start interacting with